Welcome to this deep dive where we're going to try something completely different. We're tackling the enigma that is Donald Trump's leadership, but not through the usual lens of, policies or speeches.
Right.
Instead, we're going deep inside into
Yeah.
the fascinating world of subpersonalities.
It's a unique approach, for sure. We're working with an analysis done by someone named Max, who has identified 10 distinct subpersonalities within himself.
Wow.
And get this, each one has a completely different take on Trump's strengths and weaknesses.
10 different perspectives on the same guy.
Yeah.
I'm already intrigued, but before we jump into Max's head, could you break down this whole subpersonality thing for me? I get that we all have different sides to ourselves, but are these like actual psychological constructs?
It's a great question, and it gets to the heart of why this analysis is so compelling. Subpersonalities are more than just metaphors. Some psychologists believe they represent distinct neural pathways,
Yeah.
patterns of thinking and behaving that develop over time based on our experiences and needs.
So it's like having a whole committee in your head, each member with their own agenda.
Exactly. And they could be in conflict with each other, compete for control, or even cooperate, depending on the situation. What Max has done is give names and personalities to 10 of his most prominent subpersonalities, each with their own set of values, motivations, and ways of seeing the world.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. So who are these characters living rent-free in Max's head?
We've got Addy the free spirit Bannock, the leader, Devon the disciplined, Liz the power seeker, Kelly the empathetic Kenny, the logical Mac, the playful Tyra, the wise Tommy the creative, and Val the ambitious.
That is quite the crew. It sounds like a reality show waiting to happen. So are we going to hear how each of these subpersonalities weighs in on Trump?
That's exactly what we're going to do. You'll dive into each of their perspectives, exploring not just what they admire or dislike about Trump, but why. Because what's fascinating is that these subpersonalities often react to the same events or decisions in completely opposite ways.
This is starting to sound like a political thriller meets a psychology textbook. I'm ready to meet these subpersonalities. Who do we start with?
Let's start with Addy the free spirit. Think spontaneity, a love for adventure, and a rebellious streak a mile wide. Now, remember when Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership train deal?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one early in his presidency. A lot of people were surprised, to say the least.
Exactly. Well, Addy loved it. She saw it as a bold rejection of the establishment, a classic Trump move that threw the rule book out the window for Addy. It was less about the economic ramifications and more about the sheer audacity of it.
So Addy's drawn to the shake things up energy, the unpredictable nature of Trump's leadership.
Exactly. She sees it as a sign of authenticity, a refusal to be bound by convention. But here's where it gets interesting. Addy also values genuine connection, building bridges between people. And that's where she starts to have issues with Trump.
Because his style is often so divisive.
Right? For Addy, Trump's constant need to create conflict, to pit people against each other, feels like a betrayal of her core values. It's like he's deliberately choosing division over unity, and that rubs Addy the wrong way.
I can see how that would clash with Addy's free-spirited, let's-all-get-along vibe.
Yeah.
It sounds like she appreciates the boldness, but not the cost of it.
That's a great way to put it. Now, if Addy is all about shaking things up, Bannock brings a completely different perspective to the table. He's the leader archetype, the one who thrives in structured environments, values teamwork, and believes in leading by example.
Okay, I'm curious to see how he views Trump, especially given his emphasis on structure and unity.
Well, what's surprising is that Bannock actually sees strength in Trump's ability to command loyalty and rally people around a cause. Think about the massive rallies Trump held throughout his
Oh,
presidency.
yeah, those were huge. His supporters were incredibly passionate.
Exactly. And Bannock recognizes that Trump tapped into something powerful there. He understood the emotional side of leadership, the importance of creating a shared identity and making people feel like they're part of a movement.
So Bannock's acknowledging Trump's skill as a motivator, even if their leadership styles are totally different.
Right. Bannock sees Trump as a commander,
Yeah.
someone who demands loyalty and thrives on the energy of conflict. But for Bannock, true leadership is about building trust, fostering collaboration, and working towards a shared goal. He's more like a captain who inspires his crew to row together, not just follow orders blindly.
Interesting. So Bannock sees the effectiveness of Trump's approach, but ultimately believes in a more sustainable, less combative style of leadership.
Precisely. Now let's shift gears and meet Devon, the disciplined one. He's all about self-mastery, resilience, and pushing yourself to overcome challenges.
I have a feeling he's going to have a unique take on Trump, given his focus on self-control.
You're right about that. Devon is fascinated by Trump's willpower. his ability to weather constant storms of criticism and just keep going. Remember the Mueller investigation and all the pressure Trump faced during that time.
Yeah, it seemed like every day brought a new bombshell.
Exactly. And yet Trump never backed down. He kept pushing his agenda, fighting back against his critics, and projecting an image of strength and defiance.
So Devon admires that tenacity, that refusal to give in, even when things get tough.
Absolutely. He sees it as a form of mental toughness that many leaders lack. But here's the catch. Devon also believes in strategy precision and having a clear plan of action, and that's where Trump falls short in his eyes.
Because he's often so impulsive and reactive.
Exactly. Devon sees Trump's leadership style as a blunt instrument, powerful but lacking finesse. He governs by instinct, often making decisions on the fly without fully considering the consequences. And that lack of discipline, the tendency to shoot from the hip, is a major red flag for Devon.
So Devon admires the raw willpower, but questions the lack of strategic thinking. It seems like each subpersonality is highlighting a different facet of Trump's leadership.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. Okay, who's next on our list?
Let's meet Liz the power seeker. She's ambitious, driven, and craves recognition and control, and from her perspective, Trump is playing the game of power masterfully.
I bet she loves his whole winning at all costs mentality.
You're catching on quickly. Liz is fascinated by Trump's ability to command attention, to dominate the news cycle, and to control the narrative. Think about his use of Twitter, for example.
Oh boy, that was a wild ride.
It was, and for Liz, it was a brilliant power play. Trump bypassed traditional media outlets, which he often viewed as hostile, and spoke directly to his supporters, creating his own echo chamber where he could shape the message and control the conversation.
So Liz sees Trump as a master manipulator of media and public perception.
Exactly. He understands the power of spectacle, the importance of creating a larger-than-life persona, and he's willing to push boundaries to say and do things that would make other politicians cringe, because he knows it will generate headlines and keep him in the spotlight.
But does Liz have any criticisms of Trump's approach? It seems like she's pretty impressed with his power moves.
She is, but even Liz has her limits. She sees Trump's power as reactive, fueled by conflict and controversy, while he's great at grabbing attention. She doesn't see a lot of strategic thinking or long-term vision in his actions. It's all about winning the moment, which can be exhilarating, but ultimately unsustainable.
So Liz admires the boldness and the showmanship, but questions whether Trump is playing the long game effectively.
Exactly. Now, to get a completely different perspective, let's bring in Kelly, the empathetic one. She's the voice of compassion, fairness, and social justice in Max's head, and as you might imagine, she has some serious reservations about Trump's leadership.
I can only imagine Kelly's values seem to be in direct conflict with a lot of Trump's rhetoric and policies.
That's putting it mildly. Kelly is deeply troubled by Trump's divisive language, his tendency to demonize opponents, and his policies that often target or marginalize vulnerable groups.
Like his immigration policies, for example.
Exactly. Kelly is horrified by the family separations at the border, the travel ban targeting Muslim-majority countries, and the overall rhetoric that paints immigrants as a threat rather than valuable members of society.
So for Kelly, it's not just about disagreeing with Trump's policies, it's about a fundamental clash of values.
Right. Kelly sees Trump's leadership as a direct assault on her core beliefs in compassion, inclusion, and human dignity. And that makes it very difficult for her to find any redeeming qualities in his approach, even if she acknowledges his effectiveness at rallying a certain segment of the population.
It sounds like Kelly is the voice of conscience, reminding us that leadership isn't just about achieving goals, it's also about the means we use to get there and the impact our actions have on others.
That's a great way to summarize Kelly's perspective, and it leads us to a really important question. Which of these subpersonalities resonates most with you?
Wow, that is a question to ponder. I think I need a minute to process all these different takes on Trump before I can even begin to answer that.
That's perfectly understandable, and it's a journey we'll continue on in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, I've had a moment to digest all these different takes on Trump. It's amazing how each subpersonality zeroes in on a different aspect of his leadership, almost like they're watching the same movie, but through completely different filters.
That's a great analogy. And just like with a movie, having multiple perspectives can enrich our understanding and reveal layers we might have missed otherwise.
So where do we go from here? I'm ready to dive deeper into how these subpersonalities actually view specific events or decisions from Trump's presidency.
Excellent. Let's revisit the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, withdrawal. We already touched on how Addy the Free Spirit saw it as a bold rejection of the status quo. But I'm curious, what do you think Kenny, the logical one, would have made of that decision?
Kenny's all about efficiency strategy and weighing the pros and cons. I bet he would have been pulling out his spreadsheets and running the numbers, trying to assess the potential economic impact.
You're spot on. Kenny would have been concerned about the potential disruption to global trade, the impact on American businesses and consumers, and the long-term strategic implications of pulling out of such a major trade agreement for him. Trump's decision would have felt impulsive and lacking in foresight.
Like Addy's cheering for the disruption while Kenny's in the corner frantically waving a caution flag. This really highlights how different values can lead to completely opposite interpretations of the same event.
Exactly. Now let's bring in another voice to the conversation. How do you think Tira the Wise One would have viewed the TPP withdrawal?
Tiro's all about long-term thinking, understanding global dynamics, and seeking wisdom in history. I bet she would have seen it as a missed opportunity to strengthen alliances and promote cooperation in a complex world.
You're getting the hang of this. Tira would have seen the TPP as a chance to foster economic growth stability, and diplomatic ties with key Asian Pacific nations pulling out would have felt short-sighted to her, a reactive move that ultimately weakens America's position on the world stage.
Okay, so we've got Addy loving the disruption, Kenny crunching the numbers and worrying about the fallout, and Tira lamenting the missed opportunity for global collaboration. It's amazing how one decision can evoke such diverse reactions.
Isn't it fascinating? Now, let's shift gears to a completely different event. Trump's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This was a defining moment of his presidency, and it really brought all those subpersonalities into sharp focus.
Yeah, this one was a roller coaster. I remember feeling so much uncertainty and anxiety at the time.
Absolutely. And for Max, those anxieties were playing out internally as his subpersonalities debated how to make sense of the crisis and Trump's response to it. Let's start with Kenny, our aerological friend. How do you think he reacted to the initial downplaying of the threat and the mixed messaging coming from the administration?
Knowing Kenny, I'm pretty sure he was tearing his hair out. He thrives on clarity, consistency, and evidence-based decision-making. The chaos and uncertainty of those early days must have been his worst nightmare.
You nailed it. Kenny would have been advocating for a clear, coordinated plan based on scientific data and expert advice. He would have been urging for swift action, transparency, and communication, and a unified message to the public.
But that's not exactly how things played out, did it?
Not quite. And this is where another subpersonality, Devon the Disciplined, might have stepped in. Remember, Devon admires resilience, mental toughness, and the ability to project strength in the face of adversity. He might have actually been impressed by Trump's refusal to panic, his insistence on projecting confidence and downplaying the severity of the situation.
Really, I can't imagine Devon being comfortable with ignoring scientific evidence or downplaying a genuine threat.
You're right to question that. It's important to remember that even within our own minds, there can be conflicting perspectives. Devon might have recognized the danger of the pandemic, but he also would have valued maintaining a sense of control and avoiding a public panic.
So it's like he's balancing the need for action with the desire to project strength and avoid chaos.
Exactly. Now imagine Kelly, the empathetic one, witnessing all of this. How do you think she would have reacted to the administration's response, particularly its impact on vulnerable communities?
Oh, I think Kelly would have been heartbroken and outraged. She's deeply sensitive to suffering, inequality, and injustice. Seeing how the pandemic disproportionately impacted marginalized communities, how resources were often unevenly distributed, would have been devastating for her.
You're right on target. Kelly would have been advocating for greater support for those hit hardest by the pandemic, pushing for policies that prioritize compassion, equity, and the well-being of all members of society.
It's like each subpersonality is representing a different constituency, advocating for a different set of values and priorities. This is such a powerful way to understand how people respond to complex events.
It really is, and it reminds us that even in a crisis like a global pandemic, there are no easy answers, no one-size-fits-all solutions. Our individual values, experiences, and yes, even our subpersonalities shape how we perceive the world and navigate these challenges.
Okay, I'm starting to see how understanding these internal dynamics can help us make sense of not only Trump's leadership, but also our own reactions to events and the diverse perspectives we encounter in the world.
That's a fantastic insight, and it leads us to a really important question. Which of these subpersonalities do you identify with most strongly?
That's a tough one. I think I have a little bit of all of them in me, depending on the situation. But if I had to choose, I'd probably say I resonate most with.
Hold that thought. We'll explore that question and what it means for understanding our own internal landscapes in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, so I've had some time to think. And honestly, it's tough to pick just one subpersonality that I like most identify with the most. I guess
Right.
I
Yeah.
think we all have bits of each of them in us, right?
Absolutely. We're complex creatures,
Yeah.
and our internal landscapes are constantly shifting depending on the situation, our mood, even who we're interacting with. It's not about fitting into one neat box, but rather recognizing the diverse voices that contribute to our unique perspectives.
So instead of saying I am Kenny the logical one, it's more like, hey, Kenny's pretty vocal in my head when I'm trying to make a big decision.
Right.
But Addie definitely takes over when I'm planning a vacation.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's about becoming aware of those internal dynamics, those competing desires and ways of seeing the world.
Okay, so I'm getting a better handle on how these subpersonalities work within an individual. But how does this all connect back to the bigger picture? Why should we care about these internal voices, especially when it comes to something as complex and often messy as politics?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Understanding subpersonalities could be a game changer when it comes to navigating our increasingly polarized world. Instead of just labeling people as for or against something, we can start to see the deeper motivations behind their positions.
So it's less about judging someone's stance on, say, immigration policy and more about understanding the values and experiences that shape their perspective.
Imagine trying to have a conversation about a hot button issue with someone who sees the world through a very different lens than you. If you can recognize that maybe their Kelly, the empathetic one, is really driving their arguments while your Kenny, the logical one, is front and center, it can completely change the dynamic.
Instead of talking past each other, we can start to understand the root of our disagreements, maybe even find some common ground.
Precisely. And even if you don't agree with someone's conclusion, you can at least respect the process they went through to get there. It's about fostering empathy, recognizing that we're all complex beings with a whole cast of characters influencing our thoughts and actions.
Okay, I'm convinced understanding subpersonalities is officially on my list of essential life skills. It's like a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
I love that analogy. And here's a final thought to leave you with, this analysis focused on Donald Trump. But remember, the concept of subpersonalities applies to everyone. What would your subpersonalities say about the people you admire or disagree with? How do those internal voices shape your perceptions of friends, family, colleagues, even historical figures?
Oh, mind blown. I'm already starting to analyze my own reactions to people and events in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of this concept. It's a journey of self-discovery that can lead to greater understanding not only of ourselves, but of the world around us.
Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been a wild ride through the world of subpersonalities, and I have a feeling I'll never see politics or myself the same way again.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time. Keep exploring those fascinating voices inside your head. And remember, the world is full of people doing the same thing. Maybe that's a good place to start building bridges instead of walls.